Hi guys, so sorry for the wait. Today I'm joined by the incredible Ian McElhinney. As I'm sure many of you already know, Ian is a Northern Irish actor and director who's appeared in many TV and film roles in a career spanning more than 40 years. Although there are so many incredible productions he's been a part of, notable appearances include Taggart, Hornblower, Cold Feet, and The Tudors. In recent years, he's best known for his role as Sir Barristan Selmy in Game of Thrones, Morgan Monroe in The Fall, and Grandpa Jones in Derry Girls. So, without further ado, you've had an incredibly long and accomplished career as an actor, but this was not always your main occupation. You worked as a teacher before transitioning into professional acting at the age of 30. What inspired this shift?
Just before we start on that, pardon me, this thing, I just heard a beep beep. So I've put it on airplane mode, so I hope it doesn't disturb us. Apologies for that. Out of interest, how many people here are actually interested themselves in perhaps going into acting or theatre? Anybody? Right. When did you get the bug, out of interest sake? When did you get the bug? What sort of age were you when you thought, actually, I think I'd like to do this? Primary school days. Oh my God, you were an early starter.
I'm not an actor myself, but I'm very fond of pedagogy of the oppressed, and they talk about theater being an instrument for freeing people.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, if I'm honest, for about my first 15 years, the idea of theater never occurred to me at all. And the school I went to, we had a house play. We had houses. And part of the competition between the houses was that there was a house play. And I remember being told by the house captain, you're going to be in this. I hadn't even volunteered. I was told. And I did this, and I thought, actually, this is a lot of fun. There's something about being up on stage that I like this. I like the feeling of being up here. I like the feeling that, somehow or another, you're in control. I mean, a lot of people, the idea of being on stage terrifies them. I found for me, the idea of being on stage was almost like liberating. So from about 15 until I left school, that's what I wanted to do. The more chance I got to do plays in school or whatever, I did. Now, in those days, that was the only place where you could do it. There was no, drama club for young people in the town or whatever. In a lot of towns now, there are drama groups, and you can join them if you're keen. We didn't have that. As a school play or nothing. So even when I went to leave school, I had it in my head I wanted to try for drama school. But, that's a long time ago. My parents are very traditional. The idea, I was a reasonably bright boy, the idea that you would sort of go to drama school when you could and should go to university, it's a no-brainer. Go to university, So I acceded to that. Went to university, spent all my time at university. I mean, occasionally I did some work because I wanted to get my degree, but I spent all my time doing plays. I just loved it, It was also a very good way to meet people, especially the other sex. So, it was very appealing in many ways, So that's what I did. And I had a few mates who were like me, kind of knew that at some point they were going to go on into the theatre. 2 or 3 of them went. One left, I remember he was doing an honours degree. We were in Edinburgh, so that was a 4-year degree. If you did honours, it was without honours, it was a 3-year degree. So he left after 3 and went to drama school. Another one left in the middle of his course, which was a 6-year course. He was doing architecture. He went to drama school. Another one dropped out, went to London, worked in the Hard Rock Cafe, and eventually he ended up, being an actor, but he didn't go through the drama school route. And we were we were a bunch of mates, and I knew, well, this is my destiny, but I was sort of terrified about how does it make sense? How do you earn a living? We were all, you see, the big difference between now and then is we were all fixated on theatre. Nowadays, I think most young people who want to go into it, they know that there's a screen potential that we would never have realized or known quite how to get into. So theatre was very much the driving force. And I thought, it's an insecure living. Even if you're working, it's not brilliantly paid. I'm not sure if I can live with that amount of insecurity. My parents certainly felt, get a proper job, have a pension, have prospects that you can work your way up a ladder. Pretty predictable, you know. I mean, a lot of parents to this day would say the same thing. So, sorry, I'm rabbiting on here. But,
No, not at all.
So anyway, what happened was that you see, you guys do a 3-year course. I was a long-term student. I managed to parlay my way through 8 years of education. In those days, if you needed grant aid, you could get it. Not as many people were going to university. So I went originally to Edinburgh to do languages, changed from that into social sciences, because in those days there was no social science in school. I hadn't a clue what it was like, but I thought it'd be quite nice to find out something about it. Then I wanted to go and live in America, so I went to the States to do a further degree, initially in international politics, and discovered when I got to the drama school, to the university I went to, it had its own drama school, and I wasn't in it. And because it had its own drama school, you couldn't do plays in a university dramatic society like you would do at home. So I thought, well, I have no choice here but to apply to try and get into the drama school, which I managed to do. So by the time I'd finished, it was 8 years of being a student, and it was probably about time to do something serious, you know. So I came back to England because I thought I wanted to be part of the British theatre. But because I'd been away for 3 years, I didn't quite know how to go about it. I thought I need to get back, find my feet, start sending out letters to various theatre companies or whatever, and see if somebody's interested in me. So I started teaching, and I had it in my head I was only going to do 2 years of teaching. And then I rather enjoyed the teaching. I actually liked it more than I thought. I wasn't sure that I thought I was interested in the subject. I wasn't sure that I was interested in kids. I actually find that I really enjoyed the kids, you know, and after 2 years, I wasn't ready to leave. But then the next hurdle was I was looking at 30. And I thought, well, you know, you're looking at 30 now. If you don't go now, you're probably never going to go. And, you know, some years down the line, say you're the age I am now, you'd be saying, if only, what if? I wish I tried. You'd have a regret. So I decided then, all right, just go. And I left the teaching. And then the next hurdle came along. Now, I don't know if you've got a question about this or not, but the next hurdle is the equity card. Mm-hmm. In those days, you had to have an equity card, pain in the neck. And it was, I mean, it's ridiculous, really. It was a closed shop thing. If you didn't have a card, you couldn't work. No work, no card, no card, no work. So I thought, I've no idea how I even get into this business. And I was advised by a union representative, go back to your roots. Now, when I left school at 18, as far as I was concerned, I was a citizen of the world. I was not going back to Northern Ireland. I thought, I don't know where I'm going to be, but I'm going to be somewhere else. And so it was very strange to me that I might go back to Northern Ireland in order to start work as an actor. Because we don't have an awful lot of, well, we didn't in those days have an awful lot of actors in Northern Ireland, and it was kind of like, you know, looked at askance. So anyway, I went back and I got a card to join a school's touring company. And the advantage of that was it allowed you to, A, work, B, it was a 40-week contract, which meant that, you know, by the end of it, you had, quote, fulfilled your probation as a member of Equity, and you could carry on working. So that's how I eventually, you know, went into it, and eventually ended up doing it in Northern Ireland, which was the craziest place in a way to be doing it at the time, because by that stage, quote, the Troubles had already kicked off, you know, and that didn't make life any easier, you know. I mean, you could be standing on the stage doing a show, and it wouldn't be surprising if somebody from front of house was walking along the audience saying, we've had a bomb alert, feel free to go if you want, you know, that kind of thing. So a bit bizarre, you know.
Not you're the bomb.
Sorry?
Not you're the bomb. A bomb alert instead of an appreciation of your acting.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Thank you, thank you.
It's interesting that was kind of the start of your career, given like just your recent role as Grandpa Joe in Derry Girls as well. Given that that's kind of the backdrop of that show.
Yeah.
That's really It's a nice coincidence.
It is a
Not so
nice
nice
coincidence,
coincidence.
yeah. I mean,
suppose.
Derry Girls, of course, is 20 odd years later. It's
Yeah.
the mid 90s, but we were still dealing with the problem, of course.
Yeah.
You know.
So kind of on what you were talking about with your parents and them saying maybe go into something more serious, I think that's something that a lot of aspiring actors can probably relate to.
Yeah.
Being told by their parents, "Oh, are you sure about this?"
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to any aspiring actors who are kind of scared to make that leap?
You have to accept, I think, on some level, there's a certain risk involved. But truthfully, I think in those days, it was, oh, well, that's risky and everything else is safe. Everything else is a job you can go into and stay in for the rest of your working days. I think now every job has a certain amount of risk. So I don't think acting is exceptional in the way that it might have appeared to be then. I think, any job you go into, at some point, somebody may be saying, you're not making the grade, or, we don't require you anymore, or, we're because technology is moving on, your role is now superfluous, whatever, So I think there's a degree to which you can kind of look at it a little bit more, with a little bit more balance, and say, so what? It's risky. What isn't risky these days? The second thing is that, first of all, you don't need the equity card. So if you get the break, you get the break, which is a great relief, because people were, working very hard to try and find a way in which they could prove that they should have a card. And it just slowed the whole process up. So those are two pluses. Another plus is that we now have all these, quote, platforms. So if you're interested in screen acting, it used to be, who was going to employ you? The BBC or ITV, that was it. There was nothing else. Whereas now, you've got Disney, you've got Apple, you've got Netflix, you've got Prime, you name it. There's so many different platforms out there. So, there's always the chance, there's certainly a lot more work being made. Now, that doesn't guarantee you that you'll get it, but at least there's more work being made. And that's a very promising thing. The negative side of it, for my money, is that that's all screen work. And inevitably, because people are so used to living on screen, if you like, these days, inevitably everybody's very attracted to that. So where, how, when does theatre fit in? I personally, I do, admittedly, now I do mostly screen work, but I love theatre. And I don't want theatre to die. Theatre's far too meaningful. And there's nothing like seeing something happening in front of your eyes in the moment. And you're in there amongst a group of people hopefully being absorbed by that, And so the thing that worries me is that an awful lot of people coming in now are seduced by the screen side of things and don't even go near theatre, And I kind of think in some ways, at some point, whatever you do, you should give it a go. It's where you really, earn your chops, if you like, because you're up there. There's no safety net. Screen, there's always a safety net, As it is, you do umpteen takes for all sorts of reasons. So you have some security that somewhere in there's a decent take. You also know that the camera's not always going to be on you. When it comes to the edit, they can edit it whatever way they want. So there's a whole area of protection, if you like, from being on screen that you don't have in theatre. So there's just the raw energy, the thrill of being up on stage is kind of hard to resist, So, but, all I would say is, if God is good and if you're lucky, and luck comes into it, it does come into it. If you're lucky, you will have a very interesting life, a very exciting time, and you will afford yourself, you know what I mean? You don't have to make a fortune. You don't have to be a stellar star. Those who have become stars, well done them, good luck, Sometimes they've earned it. Sometimes, let's be honest, they're lucky, but it happens. And if you don't, you still have a big role to play in this industry because there's space for, one of the great things about this is a bit like the rugby team. There's space for all types, all sizes, all sorts, you know what I mean? So, and it's very exciting. You don't know where you're going to end up. I mean, I'm ending up here today. I didn't know this was going to happen, you know? I've also ended up, you know, on the other side of the world. I've also ended up in Preston, you know? So, I mean, who knows, you know? I mean, it will be what it will be, but it will be, no offense to Preston, by the way, if anybody's from Preston. It will be what it will be, but it will be a very interesting life. It won't be, I'm getting up today, having time to see the kids, I'm off to work. They'll be in bed when I come back, so be it, you know. Grind, sitting in an office, on the phone, working on a computer, whatever. You know, today you're doing nothing, tomorrow you're, I don't know, Honolulu, you know, or Preston again. You know, I don't want to be hard on Preston particularly, you know, Wigan. You know, so, I mean, you know, it will be what it will be, but it will certainly be interesting, diverse. And you'll meet, you know, a whole rake of different people, all of whom are engaged in the same thing that you're working at, but from all different sides. I mean, like, just to divert a little bit, Game of Thrones. I mean, there's a whole bunch of actors there. We're the ones that tend to get the recognition. But when you look at the scale of Game of Thrones, there are some extraordinary people working on that. You look at the graphic design, for instance, you know, and the things that they dreamt up in terms of what they were designing. You look at the set builds that had to be made. You look at the amount of armory that had to be built. You look at the costume, the array of costumes. It was a gift in a way to a costume designer, because you could go anywhere in the world, any period in time, to create a costume, you know. So you meet a wonderful array of people in all sorts of areas of work that are not expressly the one that you're in. So it's not a shop talk kind of world in the way that sometimes if you're working in another industry, it can be. And that's, you know, makes it very exciting, you know.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of skip ahead because you mentioned the fact of like theatre and like what its role could potentially be. You've worked in television and film, you've worked in theatre, you're starting to get into voice acting for the Pale Beyond video game that is coming out soon. So you kind of mentioned how in theatre you're kind of really up there and it's kind of more of a challenge than when you have all of these different takes.
Yeah.
So how is television different from film, which is different from theatre, and voice acting as well? How are all of those things different as an actor?
Well, there used to be a hierarchy in a way that, you know, film was like at the top of the tree, then TV, then theatre, then voice, you know. It kind of used to be a hierarchy. Oh, you're that kind of an actor. But, you know, I think that's kind of shifted. I mean, most people nowadays watch box sets. Most people don't go to film the way they did years ago. So television is probably the way by which you will get best known and be most seen. Film, not exclusively, of course, but film tends to really hit the kind of 16 to 40 sort of age bracket, you know what I mean? Film, a lot of film now is all to do with, I don't know, sci-fi, fantasy, Marvel, you know, and all that kind of thing. Personally, it's just me. Most of that leaves me cold, you know. I'm very grateful to do it because, you know, it's what I'm paid to do. But as a punter, as they say, it doesn't excite me particularly. Now, where did we start?
Okay, so, well, kind of on that point, I was wondering, so you kind of mentioned TV as being where you can kind of get well known these days. You've been in amazing shows through your entire career, but some of the more recent roles that you've done has given you particular notoriety. So how has that impacted your career and everyday life?
You know, it's weird. I feel I've been lucky in that I have been a pretty solidly working actor all of my working life. But for 20 years, I could have walked down the street and nobody would know nor cared who I was. And that's quite nice. Anonymity is a very nice thing. And an awful lot of people nowadays are sort of like seduced by the idea of fame. it's a bit of a poison chalice. You know, it can make your life very difficult because suddenly you're known. Now, obviously, if you're very, very well known, it can be a handful, you know. If you're lucky enough to be known a little, it can probably be quite pleasant because people are nice to you, but they don't hound you too much, you know what I mean? But certainly, I mean, most television, it comes, it goes. So even if you've been on TV and something, you're seen today for a week, a month, somebody might recognize the face and then it's gone. And then along comes a huge thing like Game of Thrones, which for whatever reason really grabbed the world, you know, grabbed a big audience here, there, wherever. And I think because it itself was so bold in its vision and its imagination. So once you'd done that, you had a level of visibility that you'd never known before or really worried about before. And then the other side of it is, and this is kind of just the way the business works, your agent might put you up for something and a casting director might say, don't know him, or he hasn't done much, or whatever, and the door doesn't even open for the interview. Whereas after Game of Thrones, oh, he was in Game of Thrones, we'll see him. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing where the visibility, the weird thing is you can be brilliant in a show that doesn't take off and nobody knows nor cares. You can turn up in a show and not necessarily be brilliant. You can just be in that show and suddenly there's an opportunity you didn't have before. You can be in Star Wars and have a mask on your head and never be seen. And it still gives you some visibility, bizarrely, you know. So there's a kind of a weird logic in it, you know.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Star Wars one.
Yeah.
So you've also had experience as a director on the other side for Stones in His Pockets. How was it to be on the flip side?
Well, I must say I always enjoyed, I mean, I always thought I would like to direct theatrically. So, you know, my wife will go back to the early 80s. In the early 80s in Belfast, young actresses were complaining a lot about, you know, there's not really very much interesting work going on. You know, if you're an actress, very often it's like, will you like a wee cup of tea in your hand? You know, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Can we make it a bit more interesting? And so they decided, you know what, we're going to start our own theatre company. It was not, quote, a feminist company. It was simply, we're going to do work that gives us parts to get our teeth into. And the way it started was these 5 women, they started writing really about their roots. They started, you know, questioning, you know, people in the city, you know, like about their jobs and things like that. And the first thing they settled on was, let's tell the story of the 1912 women's linen mills strike. And it's a line from the linen industry. It was entitled "Lay Up Your Ends," and they thought, we're going to do this. We can all have interesting parts, and we're telling an interesting story about a particular time in Belfast history, coincident with, you know, things like strikes amongst the male workforce as well, and also, of course, the sinking of the Titanic and all that kind of thing. So anyway, they did that. And it kind of emerged over a period of time that the principal writer from among them was my wife. I mean, initially they went to a male writer and he said, look, you know, I'll certainly work with you, but at the end of the day, I think you're better placed to write this than I am. So it emerged that she was the principal writer, and this company, Charabang, went on to become a very successful company for about a dozen years, playing here, there, and everywhere, you know, around Britain and Ireland. And the more time went on, the more, although it was classified as written by the company, my wife was the principal writer. And then at a certain point she said, right, well, I've got the confidence now, I think I've got to go out on my own. And not immediately after that, but one of the plays that she wrote was this play, Stones in His Pockets. Now, the thing about Stones in His Pockets is that it was, she had formed this company now with a female director, and basically they were at the end of their year, and they'd more or less used up any money that they were getting from the Arts Council for that year. And they said, well, we're going to have to write a play with 2 actors. So the idea for the 2 actors was not, this is an idea that I'm going to try and write with 2 actors. It was kind of an obligation. So Stones was written always with 2 actors in mind. So how do you make sure you tell what is quite a big story with just the 2 actors? Anyway, they did it. That was 1996. It traveled around Ireland and kind of went by without much notice being paid to it, you know. It's just another production that toured the country. I had occasionally, when Charabang was playing, I'd occasionally said, you know, that I would direct a couple of the shows. So in 1998, the guy who was then running the Lyric Theatre in Belfast, he came to me and said, look, you haven't played here for a while. I'd like you to come back in and do something. And I said, well, you know, I think I'd like to direct something. And he said, what? I said, I haven't a clue. Leave it with me. And I went back home to my wife, Mary, and I said to her, I said, do you have anything you'd like to put on? And she said, I think Stones deserves another writing because for whatever reason, it kind of went under the radar. And part of the reason it went under the radar was because the woman who had directed it, she was actually an English director, but she was big into Irish politics. And she had loaded the production with poor suffering Ireland, you know. And it wasn't that kind of a play. It was a play about, yes, it was about the extent to which a huge juggernaut like an American film can kind of come in and not really be sufficiently sensitive to the community that it's playing in. But it's a play that, as most of her writing does, it works better if it's done with a light touch. I mean, she is naturally a funny writer, but she doesn't write comedies. She writes plays about serious subjects, but she has a lightness. And we kind of felt, well, what had happened the previous time was it was hammered down too hard, you know. So we did it again, and for whatever reason, it worked. You know, it took off, and we had an agenda for it. We wanted it. We thought it'd be nice to get it to somewhere like the Irish Arts Centre in New York. We thought we'd like to get it to the festival in Edinburgh. We managed to get it, and this was kind of the thing that kicked it off. We played it in the Lyric in Belfast and subsequently in a theatre called Andrews Lane in Dublin. And then we took it to the Traverse in Edinburgh. And a strange thing happened. It takes a while for the reviews to filter through in Edinburgh because there's so much going on. But when they did come through, nobody took a swipe at us. And that's very unusual. Usually when you do a play, you know, one critic will love it, another critic will hate it, and you think, were they at the same show? I mean, how can they be so different? But it happens time and time again. There will be a variety of opinion. On that particular show in Edinburgh, uniformly, they liked it. Some of them loved it, but every single one of them thought, this is great. So we thought then, well, this is probably bigger than we realized. Now, we had gone, sorry, I'm running on. If you want me to shut up, tell me to shut up. But we had gone to, there was a theatre director called Nick Kent, who ran the Tricycle Theatre in London for years. And we had gone to Nick. Nick did, because it was in Kilburn, Nick did a lot of Irish material, but he tended to favor material that was pretty directly political. And we had gone to Nick originally and said, would you like to take this in And he had been a bit iffy about it. But then Nick kind of realized, actually, what am I doing here? So he invited it into the trike. And when it went into the trike, a lot of those reviewers came back, the London reviewers, and they said, it's even better than we thought it was. I mean, it just, so then the next step was, well, this has to go into the West End. And we managed to sort of get a producer on board, and that's what happened. And then the thing did a big journey. So it way exceeded our expectations for it. And it stayed in the West End for, I think we went into the West End first in 99, I think. And it stayed in the West End until 2003. And on the back of that, it went to Broadway as well.
What a good first directing.
Well, it was my first big one, if you like, but it wasn't I had directed other things before, but we never really sort of set out with an expectation other than to put a play on. We had a little bit of an expectation for that, and then of course it went way beyond that expectation. And it's great because it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, that show has been picked up all over the world. It's been translated into umpteen languages. We've seen, I personally directed it in Iceland, in Sweden, in Japan, all of which were interesting in different ways. I mean, Iceland and Sweden were great because, the actors have great English. So although they're playing in their own language, at least you can talk to them one-to-one, And the funny thing is, I don't speak any of those languages, but you'd be amazed. When you know your play really well and you have the English script here and the script in the other language here, there's a point where you start to hear it. You really do start to hear it. You don't necessarily need to know the language, but you can tell if they're hitting it or not. I would have a languages background anyway, so I would be intrigued by that, but I didn't speak any of those languages. Japanese is slightly different because I had to go through an interpreter there. So sometimes you're saying, is she saying what I'm saying, or is she, modifying it for whatever reason? And is she translating what they're saying, or is she modifying that too, But it was still great fun. It was a great experience to do it in Japan, and then, of course, as I say, the play's gone on umpteen other places, and we've seen some very good productions, so we've seen some brutal ones, because it's a delicate beast, and you can spoil it,
So I wanted to talk about Game of Thrones. Is anyone here watching it right now? Because I'm about to drop a spoiler if you are. No? Okay, good. So, obviously one of the most iconic roles you've done is as Sir Barristan Selmy, who saw his demise in season 5 of the show. Hope that's not a surprise to anyone. At that time you mentioned you were surprised and disappointed. But now that the series has ended, in hindsight, do you think it was the right call to kill off your character when they did?
Well, I was very disappointed when they did it because, in truth, I had not. I don't normally read a book if you're looking at a script because the script and the book need not necessarily tally. But I had read the books. Initially, I read book 1 because somebody said, I was actually working in the theatre at the time in London, and Garrett front of the house said, I've got book 1, do you want to read it? I didn't even know it was based on books. And for about a week, no, in fact, probably 2 weeks, that book sat on my dressing room table sort of winking at me, and I was sort of pushing it away. And then I flicked through it, oh, bloody hell, it's 800 pages. It's fantasy, I'm not sure fantasy is my bag. It's small print, there's no pictures, and I thought, well, solid, I better read it. I started reading it on the tube on the way home. I got into the flat I was staying in. I sat up for 2 hours. Couldn't put it down. And after that, I was completely hooked. He's a fantastic writer. It's really well written. It's very entertaining. And after that, having enjoyed it, I thought, well, one, how long does my character survive? Because this is about people getting killed. And anyway, I enjoyed it enough. I thought, I want to carry on. So I read all 5 books that were what there were at the time, and in fact still is what there are. Loved them, and Barristan was still in there. And I thought, this is great. And I met George Martin in season 1, and he said, oh, your character's really interesting. He becomes, if you know the books, every chapter is like a Daenerys chapter, a Tyrion chapter, etc., etc. There are a bunch of point of view characters. And he said, your character, Barristan, becomes a point of view character in book 5. Oh, great. And, book 5, when I read that, I thought, oh, it's really opening out here. This is great. So I was always looking forward to season 5. I thought this is really going to expand. I thought, yeah, I'll be in this to the end. And then the first thing I get is I get the schedule. And the schedule is, normally, the wonderful thing about Game of Thrones, people think you were on it all the time. You weren't. It was kind of, we were particularly lucky because I was in warm weather kind of environment. You got your schedule, it was probably 8 weeks, no more, no less, 8 weeks. And that was it. And I got my schedule, and it was 6 weeks. And I thought, I'm doing more this season in my head, so why am I doing less time? So I sent them off a letter and said, this schedule surprises me. Have you got some sort of... They hadn't flagged it up with me. They hadn't told, I was pissed off about that too, to be honest. I said, have you got something to tell me? And they said, yeah, you're getting killed off in episode 4, I think it was. And I thought, well, they've got a nerve. I don't know. I just thought, this character, he's one of the few genuinely good characters in the story. There's a lot of bad guys, He's a good guy. And you have to have some balance, so why shouldn't he stay? He didn't. So, anyway, they came back to me, and what they said was, because of how Daenerys' story develops, we feel we have to let you go. That was the excuse given. I had to accept at the time, and I did bleat about it quite a bit. It's history now, it doesn't matter. But in a way, having got to the end of the season, or the series, I can sort of see why, because Daenerys loses the plot. And the only character who might have been able to keep her on the straight and narrow would have been Barristan. Mm. So I eventually got round to answering your question, that probably is, their justification, if you like, for why they felt he had to go. Because none of the others was sufficiently dispassionate to keep her on the straight and narrow. They all had vested interests, whereas he I think, might have. And so perhaps they did have a justification. But I wish they'd let me go in a more glorious way. Ultimately it was a fight in a back alley, and ultimately this man who's supposedly the finest swordsman in Westeros, you've never seen him fight. The first time you see him fight, he gets killed. What's all that about, So, that was disconcerting.
Yeah, not an honourable.
Not particularly honourable, no. I would like him to have died, protecting his queen or something like that, But there you go.
So that was one of the more unique characters that you've played. But you were born and raised in Belfast, and you've had many roles where kind of the Northern Ireland context has provided a backdrop. How do you think your identity has shaped the roles that you've been offered, especially more in the past?
The very first job I ever went up for, I'm going to go back. I had left teaching in Easter, at Easter time, not at the end of the normal year, because I had, from my student days, I had worked as a tour guide taking people around Europe. And I thought, great, if I leave at Easter, I can go off and I can earn a chunk of money, because at least, when you're touring, they're looking after you. And at the end of it, you have a bit of money that you haven't spent. I'll earn a chunk of money that will allow me to be out of work for 6 months if that's what happens. So I came back, and the first thing I saw advertised was Ken Campbell, who was a bit of a guru figure, a bit of a maverick as well, was putting on a show in, he was encouraging people to go to the Bubble Theatre up near Kentish Town in London for auditions. And I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I walked up there, and I was dressed as a courier. So I had the blue jacket, shirt, tie, flannels. And I walked into the bubble, and the first thing that hits you is the smell of patchouli oil and dope. And the second thing that you're aware of is that everybody's sort of like lounging around in sort of colorful shirts and jeans and stuff. And I felt like, complete fish out of water. I thought, what am I doing here? This is ridiculous. I've obviously got the wrong head on me. Do you know what I mean? I'm not thinking properly. Bizarrely, he was an extraordinary character. Most of the people who were there. This was a shares only. This was a job with no money. Shares only. Being Ken Campbell, it was 10 plays, each an hour long, telling the story of a guy called Neil Oram, sort of like going off to India to fight the Bhagwan Rajneesh and all that kind of thing. And it was his life story. This was, kind of telling the story of the hippie era, if you like, when lots of people went to India. And after a series of readings, what happened is that Ken decided he couldn't make up his mind whether one person should play this character through all 10 plays, or if he should divide it up between a variety of actors. Now, bizarrely, although I started out like a fish out of water, myself, Bill Nye, and an actor whose first name was Russell and who, for the life of me, I can't remember his second name, and I don't even know if he's still in the business. We were 3 people that he was thinking of, should I let one of them play all of it, or should I give them each different bits of it? Eventually, he settled on this Russell guy to play the whole thing. At around the same time, I got the call, you can go off to work for this school's touring company in Northern Ireland and get your equity card. So I went to Ken and I said, look, it's a bit of a no-brainer. They're going to employ me for 40 weeks. I'm going to get my card. I'm going to be paid, So I want to drop out. He was dead decent about it. He was fine. But he said to me, he said, I'll just tell you now that probably for the next 10 years, you will play policemen and terrorists. And away I went. And he was absolutely right. For the next 10 years, not so much on stage, but even on stage, quite a lot of sort of like, terrorist parts. But certainly any camera work I did, I was either, the head of a UDA cell or an IRA cell. And if I was a policeman, I was kind of like an authority figure, sort of like trying to sort of like find who's the guilty party here. Mm-hmm. So whether I liked it or not, I'd always thought of myself, I'm, quote, an actor. I'm not a Northern Irish actor, I'm an actor. Mm. But whether I liked it or not, in the way in which the business works, I became, it makes life easier, for agents, casting directors, whatever. They want to find a box to put you in. So I became a Northern Irish actor, bit of a heavy, you know what I mean? Mm. And now, in a way, I can't complain because there was a lot of stuff done about the Troubles throughout the 80s. So it meant if you're a Northern Irish man, it wasn't so easy for the women, you got work. But at the same time, you were in a box. And I didn't want to be that, but at the same time, I didn't know initially how to break free from it. For whatever reason, in the late 80s, I got my first big TV break that did not require me to be Northern Irish. But, whether I liked it or not, sort of telly-wise, certainly there was a number of years where that was it. You were a Northern Irish type, period,
So I have one more question before I open it up to the floor, which is, what out of all of your roles has been the most challenging for you to play? They always ask what's your favorite, but I wanted to say which one was the hardest. I'm just curious.
I think everything you do, I have to say, first of all, on the favorite front, I had a lot of difficulty sort of saying there's a favorite because I've enjoyed doing the great majority of what I've done, When it comes to challenging, rather than a particular part being the most challenging, I think every part has moments in it that are challenging, where you say, oh, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to negotiate this. And sometimes what happens is you're nervous beforehand, you haven't worked out beforehand what you're going to do. And sometimes, not always, sometimes in the moment, something magical happens and it sorts itself. I mean, a friend of mine has a great line. He says, don't beat yourself up about what you're going to do. Just do it and then wonder afterwards how you did it, you know. And in a way, that's kind of good, because if you fret about it too much, you tie yourself in knots. So, I mean, in a lot of parts, there'll be a scene where you think, that's going to be a bit of a hurdle, you know. Sometimes on stage, one of the hardest things is simply you get a line which, for whatever reason, you're inclined to trip on, you know, just stumble, because the words don't seem to run together freely. And you're always kind of come up to that thing, oh, am I going to mess this up, or am I actually going to say it fluently? You know what I mean? That can happen. I think, actually, I don't mind the emotional stuff. I can lend myself to the emotional stuff quite readily. The part I probably struggled with most, and I wish I hadn't, was there's a play, a Derry Girls play called The Accidental Death of an Anarchist, which is a very funny play. And I played the maniac, is the character in that. It's a great part. And I think I would love to play it again, because I don't think I did a particularly good job of it when I did it. And I'd love to go back and try it again. It's too old now, you know, but I mean, if I could have done it 5 years later, I would love to have gone back and done it 5 years later, you know. So there's ones where you think, oh, that one got away, you know. But in the main, I feel I've been lucky. I feel most of the stuff I've done, I've enjoyed doing, you know. And if you enjoy doing it, there's a bit of a chance that it will be all right because you've enjoyed it. There's nothing worse. I mean, the awful thing about theatre is if you're doing a play where you know it's not working and you have to go in, you know, oh, here we go again. Today, tomorrow, twice on Saturday, whatever it is, you know, and they're not getting this. But you still have to do it. And you still have to convince yourself that you believe in it. But that's not a bundle of laughs, really. That's quite hard work. With touch wood, that hasn't happened too terribly often. So
That's good to hear. Okay, so audience questions. Oh, okay, quite a lot. Would you like to choose? I like taking questions.
We'll start here. Right.
Hi.
Ian, I don't know how you survived so many years in New England, because I couldn't do 6 weeks. So well done.
Why only 6 weeks?
Because I was working at Harvard and I wasn't working with people I was compatible with. Anyways, my question is, because you talked about the importance of roots, I wanted to ask, could you please reflect with me on the role of Irish language in theatre today, and where you think sort of the future lies in terms of the use of non-English languages when it comes to expressing oneself on stage?
Well, first of all, I'm Irish, yes, Northern Irish. I'm Northern Irish Protestant. And what that means is that you never grow up learning Irish. Unless, and this is beginning to happen now more so, unless you elect it for yourself. You know, if you say, I'm going to go and learn Irish, then you can go and join an Irish language class somewhere. But unless you make that choice yourself, you can grow up in Ireland and never learn a word of Irish. Now, in the South, in fact, I'm not even sure anymore. It used to be, oh yeah, you still learn Irish in schools in the South. It used to be that if you didn't pass it at A-level, or their equivalent of A-level, you didn't graduate. So you had to, I mean, everybody, it actually killed Irish in many ways, because everybody hated it, because it was compulsory to get that in order to get anything else. That they did away with very wisely, I think. It's actually, there's quite a lot of Irish actors who would have Irish, And there is quite a lot of Irish language film being made. I, unfortunately, will never be part of that because I can't speak it. But there is quite a lot of Irish language film being made, and that's a good thing. And of course, there's a lot of Welsh language film being made. I don't know about Scots Gaelic so much, but there certainly is a lot of those being made. The problem is, I mean, English is, I mean, when I was a kid, people were trying to promote Esperanto, but frankly, English is the lingua franca, you know, and it's very easy. It makes us very lazy when it comes to learning other languages, but it's very easy just to say, well, let's focus on the English language world because, you know, it's available to us, you know. I'm not going to start now, this age, to go into anything like that, you know. I beg your pardon? At this tender age, yeah, thank you very much. I'm not going to start doing that. But I mean, I certainly, I mean, I have to say, one of the things I find interesting for myself is during lockdown, I started watching, I mean, I was never a big box set watcher, but I started watching box sets quite a lot, more often than not, in other languages and following the subtitles. And I find that actually very refreshing. I was grateful to watch things in other languages and just learn a bit about, you know, what they were making rather than following my own world, you know. And it's been fun. I've enjoyed that, you know. Anyway, who else was, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. What do you do to get into character, particularly on film sets when there's lots of cameras around?
What? Say that again?
What do you do to get into a character?
You know, it's very hard to know. I suppose what you've done is you've thought about it before you go on set. You've had the material for a while. Unless, of course, it's Star Wars, where they never give you anything. It's a bizarre world. But you've thought about it. You've read your scripts. I always believe in reading the script. Some people read their parts. I do not know how they do that. Read the script so you have a sense of the whole thing. You have a sense of where you sit in the whole story, of what your relationship to the other characters is. And I guess if you've thought about it enough, when you come in there, it's in your head somewhere. So when you come to do it, it doesn't matter if you've been having a cup of coffee and chatting with somebody about something completely different, or, you know, in film, you have to switch on in the sense that when you go out on any given day, you don't know when they're going to get to you, and they don't know even when they've got you, when they're going to be ready for you, because they've got to, you know, the lighting can take quite, I mean, you rehearse what you're going to do, and then they have to work out where they're going to place the cameras and what. In some cases, they've already come with a shot list. In other cases, they're working out the shot list as they go. And then they have to light for each individual shot on that shot list. So you could be in the morning, done a rehearsal, and then you sit around for a couple of hours before you actually go to film. But when the time is to go to film, well, you've got to be ready. There's no debate there. You've got to be ready. So, and you know, your head could be any one of a number of places. You could have been making phone calls galore. I mean, the boiler's broken down or whatever it is. So you kind of have to have done your prep elsewhere, you know, beforehand, and just have it in your head who you think you are and how, given who you think you are, you think how that character might relate to others in the scene. It doesn't have to be hugely dramatic, but, you know, it's just worth thinking about those things so that at least you bring those thoughts with you, you know.
Thank you very much, Ian, for coming along tonight, and it's great to hear a shout out to Stones in His Pockets. It's a play that obviously has great meaning to all of us, and a play that I've read and watched a number of times, although A Night in November is my favourite of your wife's plays. Yeah. Two questions, one a little more serious, another one a little bit more jokey. As someone from Northern Ireland, someone who's an actor but has been involved in Northern Irish acting and has obviously been involved in plays and TV and film right around the world, we've seen Northern Ireland's art scene grow massively over the last 10 to 15 years, and that is despite funding per head being less than half of what the rest of the UK get. That infrastructure is not there, but there's that commitment. And as someone who is involved, or who was involved in a number of youth charities involved in theatre and acting, I felt that, and it's a great way to bring people together through that, through reconciliation, bring different communities together. But how do you feel, and I feel you've contributed a lot to the industry in Northern Ireland, how do you feel as someone from Belfast that the industry is growing? Does that make you feel proud, or how do you feel? And secondly, as a fellow Belfast man, how could you play a Derry girl? It's a very different, very different city.
All right, it's nice to hear the accents. I'll answer the second one first. I actually went in to chat with Michael Lennox, the director, and Lisa, the writer, on Derry Girls. And I said to them, I said, you know, I could work on a Derry accent, but frankly, I don't want to beat myself up about it. And there's a very simple reason why. This is not just to kind of get out of it. The Derry accent is very, Paddy had to go to Derry. You know, it's a very, you know, it's a lilty accent. And a Belfast accent is a much harder edged accent. You know, we don't take any prisoners. Get that through your head. You know what I mean? It's that kind of an accent. And I said, look, Grandad Joe doesn't beat about the bush. He lays it down. The law is his, and you abide by his law. I would rather play that reality, and if that means I'm going with a harder edged accent than a pure Derry, that's what I'd rather do. So I said that up front at the beginning, and you know, so after that, we didn't worry about how Derry are you. You know, I mean, I'm, you know, a Derry person would say, well, you might well say you were a long way off it. You know what I mean? So we didn't beat ourselves up about that. To come back to the other, it's very frustrating, the situation in Northern Ireland. The problem is we are, as is often said, we're a tight, wee country. You know, tight, wee country where people are very kind of inward looking. I mean, this is a bit of a generalization, but there is that element there that they're great when it comes to business and getting on with things and writing things down. When you talk to somebody in the South, it's like, tomorrow, or we'll agree to shake on it, or whatever. You know, you talk to people in the North, want it in writing, want it now, you know, so I can trust it. So, you know, there's that kind of side of things. What it means is that there's very little, sadly, there's across the country, the province as a whole, there's very little kind of far-ranging appreciation of the arts, I think it's fair to say. Something that is certainly true there, and I think it's probably true across the whole of the UK. When it comes to, say, theatre, who buys the tickets? Women. Majority of ticket buyers are women. Majority of people who actually like going to the theatre or want to go to the theatre are women. The men very often go along because the women have bought tickets and they're going. And they may go with a willing heart, or they may not. And I think, you know, I have friends who I would like to think should appreciate theatre, and they don't do it enough. For me, not for me. You know what I mean? I also feel that when it comes to funding, that it's very much like, well, these are all the important things, and then, all right, we'll do something for the arts. But it's in the back burner. I also find it offensive that of the various, quote, ministers of culture that we've had, most of them have hardly been to a theatre show in their lives. And if they have been, it's, I was in a panto once. Hello? You know, I mean, there's a side of things there that is very disappointing to me. And I'm not enamored of our own Arts Council at all. I don't think they're very good at what they do. I mean, I've, you know, proposed for many years that more funding should go into the professional arts. I mean, another thing that's happened now is drama was part of the arts, culture, and leisure. And now it's part of, quote, communities. And the danger of being part of communities is that means, like, community groups, there's a big emphasis on we've got to encourage people in their communities, and we've got to show parity of esteem. So if we do it for a Catholic area, we have to do it for a Protestant area. There's a lot of money goes into promoting, like, a drama group in the Falls or something like that, or in the Shankill. Now, I have nothing against that, but the problem is if they're taking it from the same pot that they're trying to support the professional arts, then we have a problem. And quite frankly, as it is, we're undersubscribed compared with any other major region of the UK. So that is frustrating to me, you know.
This is just a more kind of casual question, but if there was any theatrical role, ignoring kind of age and gender or any kind of limitations, what would be your kind of dream role to sink your teeth into?
Well, I know that had they come to me at the right age, two parts I would love to have played, never did and now never will. One would have been Proctor in The Crucible, and another one would have been Eddie Carbone in View from the Bridge, which kind of testifies to the fact that I'm a big fan of Arthur Miller, period, you know, and I think both those parts are fantastic parts, and they you know, there's a real, going back to what I said earlier, there's a real emotional ringer in both of those parts, and I would love to have done the journey of either of those characters, you know. I suppose at this stage, a part I haven't played that if the opportunity arose, I would probably want to have a bash at would be Lear. You know, it's been talked about a little, but it hasn't come to fruition, so I don't know if it ever will, you know. But I suppose, you know, if you're going to do one of the big Shakespeare roles, you know, that would be a nice one to do. I've played Mackers, but that's about it, you know, so. You know, I've played quite a few Shakespeare parts, but the only other kind of like lead one, you know, was Mackers, you know. So, did that fully answer your question? Yeah.
You picked all my GCSE texts.
Oh, yeah.
Back to Derry Girls, I just wanted to know, you were talking about the challenges you kind of sometimes were facing. Did you have any of those when you were filming Derry Girls?
Challenges with Derry Girls?
Yeah, in any of the scenes, any stick out, or did it all come?
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have to say, I loved doing Derry Girls. It was just a lot of fun. And you know, one of the weird things about doing comedy is that, you know, in the morning you're reading a scene and you're all falling out laughing. You say, oh, this is funny, you know. By the time you've completed working on the scene, you're sort of saying, was this ever funny? You know what I mean? Because you get bored silly with it. Because the problem with comedy is, if you're doing drama, sometimes you can tell a story with a big wide shot. Now, you may have to come in for certain tight sort of shots, but you can tell it with a wide sweep. If you're doing comedy, because there's a gag line and there's a response to the gag, you're very often having to, you know, shoot every which way but loose. And especially when in some of those scenes you have 10 of us in the room. How the hell are we going to get through this? You know, I mean, because there's the granddad, and then there's the parents, and then there's the kids, and then there's the other kids. You know, I mean, we had a lot of big scenes like that, and there does come a point where you think, God, we still haven't finished this scene. And was it ever funny, you know? But you kind of know, essentially, that, I mean, she's a great writer. It is very funny. But the great thing about Derry Girls, and I think we all kind of probably grew into this more, we started out thinking we were doing, quote, comedy show. But we realized that we were doing something that was also at times a very heartfelt show. It had a proper heart to it, you know. There was a real warmth about it, I think. And ultimately, at times, quite a moving show. Lisa is very good at what is extremely difficult, which is writing an ending. The hardest thing, any of you who write will probably know, the hardest thing is how to end. And I think, with every single season, she ended each season brilliantly, for my money. And very often, there was something very touching about those endings, that made you realize you were dealing with something bigger and richer than just a, quote, a straightforward comedy, And I think when it came to the very end of the series, I don't know how you guys feel. I mean, lots of people have said, are we going to have any more? Personally, I feel it was a proper full stop on the 3 seasons, and that really it's better left there than to go back to it. You know what I mean?
Do you think that growing up in Northern Ireland and being brought up in a Northern Irish family has given you anything that you've sort of been grateful for in your life and that you found useful that you might not have had you been brought up in England, in an English family?
I can't really compare across. All I can say is people are very outgoing. I mean, despite all the chaos and all the mayhem that we've had and the violence that is in the society, people are very outgoing, not just in Northern Ireland, in Ireland as a whole. And they're easy to meet. And very often there's, as we would say, good crack. There's a warm-heartedness, there's a willingness, I think, to meet people, engage with people. If you go into a bar in Ireland, anywhere, you need not sit in your own and look at your pint. At some point, somebody will drag you into a conversation whether you want it or not. But because of that, I think, there's a desire for engagement. And I think that's a positive thing, when it comes to the work. Whatever your world of work, I think, it doesn't have to be the acting world, but I think it's a positive thing in acting. But whatever your world of work, that willingness to kind of engage, to meet, to push away apparent or supposed barriers and say, I'm going to get to know you, whether you like it or not. I'm going to grab a hold of your heart here. You know what I mean? That kind of thing, I think, is a very positive thing about, that part of the world. I mean, I don't know how you feel. What's your name? Sorry? Luke? I mean, do you feel, for instance, you're here studying now. You've probably, like me, probably got plans to go God knows where all. But do you feel a tug or not back to Ireland?
Yeah, my heart is very much in Ireland, but especially in Belfast. I think there's a unique subculture in Northern Ireland, but especially in Belfast.
Yeah.
There is that fact that we understand each other the way that people don't understand us, which is probably a new thing for them. But I always feel like I have a duty to look after that place. And if I stay here, I will go home at some stage.
Yeah.
I think that's why, as a nation of people, we're very political. We're very outspoken because we care so much about it because we've all gone through a lot.
Yeah.
I'm lucky that I was born in 2002. I go to know in peace, but my family's been affected. Every family's been affected, and there's that with a unique bond.
Yeah.
And we are very laid back people, and I find it weird when I go here and I smile at everyone, wave at everyone, they're like, what the hell are you doing?
Yes. Why are you smiling? How dare you?
But there's just something special about Irish people that I think unites us, no matter what.
The funny thing is, it flips both ways because you do genuinely have a warmth, I think, that is very nice. But then also, of course, the trouble's demonstrated, it can just flip the other way. Subliminally, you kind of know there's subjects you don't, until you've sussed out the territory, there's subjects you don't go to. Once you've sussed out the territory, you may say, all right, we can talk freely about politics or whatever, and we can agree to differ or whatever. But initially, you might find you're steering clear of those things until you're pretty sure that, they're okay,
This is an interesting topic just because you yourself said that you never thought you would go back to Northern Ireland and that's where you ended up for the rest of your life. So,
the thing that's weird for me is that, as I say, I didn't really think I would go back. I ended up back there. for probably about 10 years, I thought I should be leaving because it seemed in those days that you were always being asked, you know, like casting agents or whatever, when are you coming to London? When are you coming to London? Because the whole business sort of seemed to emanate from London. Nowadays, of course, it doesn't matter because nowadays, you know, you don't even go in to meet people face to face anymore. You self-tape. If you're asked to tape, you self-tape and see what happens after that. So the need to come over to London is not what it was. And now, I didn't plan this. I didn't expect this, but I'm not sorry that I ended up back in Belfast, you know, because it's actually a very beautiful part of the world. I mean, the whole of the north coast of Ireland is stunningly beautiful, but people are easy, you know. It's a very embracing sort of place to live, I think, you know, and so I've been grateful for that.
Amazing. Well, on that note, unless we have any last questions, I think we should probably wrap up as we went a little bit over. But thank you so much for coming. Can we get one last round of applause for Ian?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.